What time is it, my creatives? That's right, it's photo hacking time, and today we're going to do a tutorial from Anti-Ableism. And she says, can you create a brush and draw it on digital paper? Every time I will make repeating tiles, do you suggest we hand draw it? So yes, you can hand draw the brushes, and you can scan them in and remove the background. However, I do want to mention that when you're creating brushes or you're creating anything that you're going to make into a Photoshop brush, it needs to be in grayscale. And what I mean by that is, let's go ahead and go into Photoshop. All right, so this is a flower. It's hand-drawn flower material, and as you can see, it has been scanned in. The image size is quite large. So when you're making Photoshop brushes, I mean, this is a good size brush. I would bring it down a little bit. So I'll press Control T and just, you know, make it a little bit smaller. And then to create the brush, you'll just create a square over it like so with the marching ant square tool. I know it has a professional term, but we don't do that here. Then you'll go to Edit and Define Brush Preset, and there you'll have this lovely brush. Okay, at this point, and I'm going to create a new document so we can work from there. We're not going to name it anything because we don't do that here. I'm going to change the background into white. Okay, and I'm going to create a new layer, and I have this brush selected, and you can see it's really way large, so we're going to just size it down a little bit. I'm gonna just take these brushes out of here, delete brushes. Okay, and we're gonna size this down a little bit, not too much, just enough so we could see it, so we could do stuff with it. So this is what you would call a stamp brush. It is a little crooked too, and if we bring it up a little bit higher there, you could see that it has really great quality there. All right, so how do we fix this? We're gonna go to Window, Brush Settings, okay? Now, if you go to the brush tip shape, you could see that it has about a 10% spacing here, and I'm just gonna nudge it just a little bit there so you can move it around and your brush, so now it has a perfect, you know, aligned brush if that's what you're wanting to do. If you take the spacing out, here you have all of these tiled brushes that she was talking about, okay? But if you just want a stamp brush, just a plain stamp brush, and you want to take the spacing all the way down to 1%, and so that you don't have that stamping, I mean, you don't have that, you know, tiled pattern look, okay? All right, so, then I'll just go through the different aspects here. So shape dynamics, this will change the size of, and I'm just going to take this brush tip shape and I'm going to put it back at 10%. I'm just going to space it out here so we can see what's going on. So the shape dynamics, I wanted to show you something. So you can change the size and the jitter. So this will have a randoming effect of the size. So if you go back to the brush tip shape and change the size here, now when you're painting, let me just create the size a little bit larger. There's a variation of size, okay? And you can bunch them together too, and it creates a really cool patterny type effect. Okay, so now you have a flowing brush that you can use for the flowering, you know, so that's really cool. So if you can also add a texture to make it a little bit darker, but we're not going to do that. Now this scattering effect is really great, but we need to, you know, change some things here. So let's go ahead and play with these features here. So let's go ahead and show you what they do. But before we go to the scattering, I just wanted to show you some cool things with the shape dynamics. Okay, so if you bump this all the way up, it's not going to have a variation of, it's all going to be the same size. Okay, of course. So if you didn't want to have a variation in size, you would just bump this all the way up to 100%. Now, if you want to change the angle of these, so if you wanted to have them pointing every which way to kind of give it the impression that it's not so linear, so like to make a wreath to go around, that's cool. And then you can also change the roundness too here. And if you push back the angle gener, so this is uniform now when you make a circle. Now, if I create a new brush from this, you're gonna see something really cool. All right, so I'm gonna just take the circle tool with the marching ants and press shift and hold it out, okay? And then I'm gonna go to paths, all right? And where's my paths? Let me move my layers out of the way. Okay, let me just show you the paths. I'm gonna click this little coggy looking thing there, and it's gonna turn this into like a workable path. All right, and then I'm gonna right click and click stroke path. And I'm gonna choose from brush and press OK. Now I'm gonna click the marching ants again, all right? And then press Control D. And now we have a perfect wreath from the brushes that we just created. All right, so that's one way that you can make, you know, the brushes less, you know, patterny or like whatever. But when you're dealing with objects like this, with actual like physical drawn objects, you're always going to have some sort of pattern or tiling. So that's just because that's the way you make brushes. Now, if you're talking about like a dynamic brush where, let me go back to my tools here. Where did they go? Ah, I got everything mixed up here. Okay, so if you're talking about like a dynamic flowing brush, that's different. So I'll show you that with the watercolor brush here in a second. So if you go back to shape dynamics, you can change the roundness. You can flip it, project it. So one is going one way, one is going the other. You could flip Y. You could have different variations of this. So, and then you can also change the angle. So if you wanted them to go catty-wacky, I just made that word up, but I don't know the exact terminology for that. So catty-wacky is when they're like facing just different directions, and it looks more like a wreath, like how you would see like a real flower setup. You know what I'm saying? All right. So scattering, which would just take these flowers out, and then it would just scatter everywhere like a pattern brush. So yeah. And then you can take the count, which it would be like really bushy, which I don't know why you would want to do that, and the count gener. So that just makes more of them. You could take both axes off and put both axes on, and that's just basically left and right axes. You know, like as far as like the direction goes. You can add texture to it, which I don't know why you would in this instance. And then you could add a dual brush, which I don't know why you would in this instance. This is not something that you would probably do. You can also add color to this. So if you bump up the hue and saturation jitter, you can make it change colors. Of course, you would have to have like a color or something selected in here in your color picker to make it change color. And you can save these colors too. This is more has to do with like if you have the Wacom pen tablet, you can set those up. Brush, pose, noise, wet edges. That's more for like all of this extra stuff is for like say for instance watercolor. Okay, so moving on, let's go ahead and make a watercolor brush. So now we're going to import just some like default legacy brushes in Photoshop. Everybody should have these. Okay, so I'm just going to restore those. All right, so what you want to go down to is the Natural Brushes 2, I believe it is. And they have a really great watercolor brush here. And we're going to be working with this. And I am going to change this to like a light gray so we can see what we're doing at first. And then we'll change it to a pink color. So like I said, for the brush tip shape, if you want to create a flowing brush, you're going to take this spacing all the way down. So we got something like that going on, which is not really something that we want. I'm going to increase the size here. And let's just leave this at about, I don't know, 15%. No, that's too much. Let's say 10. No. So we're just going to leave it about 4%. Okay, that's good. All right, so wet edges is usually what you would select for like a watercolor brush. So that's pretty cool. And the other settings in here, we're going to go ahead and set them all up. But if you want a dynamic brush, like I said, you're going to want to set the spacing all the way down this way so you have a free-flowing brush. And for non-dynamic brushes, for the pattern brushes, you see how it looks patterny? You set the spacing a little bit farther up. So I'm just going to put it back at 4. So please remember that, okay? But before I do, one of the secrets to making watercolor brushes that look realistic is using a great texture. So I'm on unsplash.com. I'm going to put a link in the description below. And we're going to be using this texture here. So let's go ahead and open it up in Photoshop. Okay, so I got my seamless texture here, and I'm going to go ahead and create a new document, 1000 by 1000, 72 DPI, because we're going to make this into a seamless texture. I'm going to just go ahead and pause our brush for a minute. We can come back to it because we haven't really gone that far. Press Control A, Control C, and Control V, and we're going to press Control T, and we're going to size this bad boy down. Size it down until it's small enough to fit. If you press Control minus and go out, you'll be able to see this whole thing here. And we want to get a good majority of this there. That's what we want. A good part of the texture. Okay. So perfect. So remember how I told you guys to make a seamless texture in the last video? So press Control R, bring out the guides to the 500 mark on both sides. Okay, that's all you do. We're going to take the square marching ant tool here and just press Control C, create a new layer, Control V, press Control T, right click, rotate horizontal, drag that bad boy this way, press enter. Merge those two together, merge. All right, we're gonna do the same thing on the bottom. Really not that hard. Control C, Control V, Control T, right click, flip horizontal, drag that bad boy this way, press enter, merge those two bad boys together. Now we're gonna do the top layer, Control C, duplicate, Control V, all right, Control T, and right click, flip vertical, drag that bad boy all the way down to the bottom. Now you have a perfect seamless texture, and that wasn't difficult at all, now was it? All right, whoops, we didn't want to move that. Okay, so now we're going to clear these guides off. We're going to press Edit, Define Pattern. Yeah! Alright, so now we have our texture for our watercolor brush, so we can go back and close that out. We can go back in and go back to creating our brush, which is still here. Alright, so press Control D. I'm going to take this I'm going to just arrange some stuff around here. I'm going to put my tools on the side, put my brush settings over here so you guys can see, and my layers on this side, and we're going to be working in the middle. All right, so with this brush selected, okay, I'm going to go to texture and I'm going to add my new texture here, this watercolor texture, and I have it set to invert. And you can play with the depth and the settings here. Of course, I'm going to choose linear height, see what that comes up with. I think I'm going to take my brush tip shape and bring it all the way down to 1%. Go back to texture. And so now we have some kind of like wispy thing. It's not really going the way we want it to go, but that's okay. We're still working on this. So let's just keep at it. So now we have some see-through stuff going on here because I took the depth a little bit away from there. So as you can see through the texture there a little bit, but we still got more work to do. So let's go over all the settings once again. I have this brush selected. Let's go to Windows, brushes. I think I have it over here. Yes. Okay. All right. We got frozen there for a minute. So if you didn't see the brush that I picked, just rewind it. Actually, it's right here. It's under natural brushes 2 and the legacy brushes. I can't click on it because we'll freeze. Anyways, I digress. So these are the settings to create your dynamic brush. I'm just going to change the color here to a pink now. And let's go to my layers. I'm going to create a new layer here. And that is the dynamic watercolor brush I've made so far. So if you go to the brush tip shape, I have the spacing on 1%. I have it set to 90 pixels at a 161 negative degree angle. The roundness is 100. You can change the roundness to 80. And that just makes it a little bit more like texturally. I don't know how to say that. Okay, shape dynamics, I have the size jitter set to 68%. The minimum diameter at 100, the angle at 71, the roundness at 96, and the minimum roundness, and I have it flipped X. Scattering, I have on both axes is 34%, 16 count. I have 49% count jitter. Texture, I'm using the texture that we created on invert. The scale is 34%. Brightness is -144, contrast is 100, texture each tip. If you turn that off, it may have a lighter effect if that's what you desire. So you can create 2 different ways to make this. So if you turn the depth on and off, you can create that darker, and that creates a really cool watercolory effect. Okay, so you want to turn off texture each tip. You can turn it back on to create a more darker effect, but to turn it off on subtract, and you can change the depth here of how light and dark you want the brush. Okay, moving on. I have a dual brush selected. I have the 118 in this pack. So if I take that brush off, it takes the texture off. So I'm doing double textures here. So these are the settings I have for the dual brush. I have it set to multiply. At 118 size, 58% spacing, 402 on both axes, and count 13. I have brush pose turned on. These are the settings that I have in here. You can turn it on and off. This is more for like a Wacom pen or something like that. The wet edges. So if you turn this off, when you paint over the brush, it's not going to have those like wet edges. So let me go ahead and delete that. And so when you paint over your document here, it's just a little bit more realistic for the wet edges. So I don't know. So you can turn that on and off and see how you like that effect. I'm just gonna paint one stroke here with the brush pose on and without. So it seems to be a little bit lighter, so totally up to you. If you go back to the texture here, you can put the texture up to 100%. You can change the contrast here. And what that does is, hold on, it gives it more of a textured feel to the brush. So I'm at 100% scale. You can change the brightness here. I'm going to go back to this so you can see the difference here. It's just more it has more of a texture to it. So you can brighten up the textures in here. You can also, I'm going back to the texture here. If you select texture each tip, you can change the jitter here. So that's totally up to you, but I'm gonna leave that off, and you can make it darker, the texture, or you can make it lighter. So you can choose build up and protect texture. So now that we're painting this watercolory brush, looks pretty cool. Now, if you want to break this apart to like make it a little bit like flowing, let me show you that. So if you wanted to make this like a large flowing watercolor brush, you would just bring up the scatter here, and this would paint your whole entire canvas into watercolor. Of course, you can get some varied effects if you change the texture here. So if you go back to your pattern, edit, define pattern, and let's just say I'm going to create a new texture here, 1000. You can create variations of your pattern to create different effects. So where's my layer? Okay, let's go to pattern overlay. And we're gonna choose that watercolor texture. We're gonna put 100 and snap to origin. And we are just going to move this around. And this will create a variation of our texture here. Hold on, normal. And you can do a color overlay here. I'm gonna do a darker color. Whoops. Shit. Okay. This is going to just kind of darken the textures up. And you can go to edit, define pattern. Okay. All right. So going back to our watercolor brush, you can change this pattern here to this one. And take off the invert. Take the scattering down a little bit. Texture, and can play with these settings here. And it creates different effects. So this is a totally different type of watercolor brush. And you can change the scattering here, and it makes it like really flowy. This is so much fun, right? Right, guys? And I just clicked on wet edges to see what that would do. Let's go back to texture, go back to overlay. But no, it was subtract, right? And texture each tip, see what that does. Let's take off the depth. And really, guys, it's all about playing with this And that's like a really cool effect right there. So if you take the depth jitter down, you have like a grainy sort of watercolor wash. I don't know. It kind of looks like eyeballs to me. Like, you know, like what you would have like in your eyeball, like the red area. So that would be a cool brush. Sometimes I accidentally make brushes of things that wouldn't necessarily didn't know that I could create. Yeah, that looks really cool. So this is like a really light wash. And I want to take the depth out. Hold on. There we go. So this is like a really light wash brush that you can create. It's like super light. And we want to turn off some of this contrast. Yes, because we want to make it really light. And I'm going to change this scale to 50%. Actually, I don't like that. I'm going to use this one. Yes, so that's the kind of look. I used the lighter texture. So I didn't make the other one seamless, so I kind of messed that up. So this is a really light watercolor brush, and I mean, you can make this pretty big. Go back over here, make that really big. You could literally paint your whole canvas here. Here's a pink. All right, now you could change the color. Let's do a really light blue. There we go. Of course. All right. And I'm gonna just save this brush out because I like it. And then we can do a blending mixer brush tool. So let's go ahead and choose something that we can create a blending tool. Let's see. Put your caps lock on so you can see what we're doing here. Oh no. I cannot see the tip of my brush. Okay. We don't want a square brush. I think we want something different. We want something, yeah, kind of like that, but not. Okay. I'm gonna make this pretty large. Let's see what's going on here. Yeah, that's a good blendy brush. Okay, so what I'm gonna do here is I'm gonna change the scattering a little bit, the count, because we want, yeah, that's what we want. All right, so I want to choose white because I don't necessarily want that to blend with the color that I have. And then let's do a moist heavy mix here. I'm gonna change the flow down, the mix. It's not mixing. Clean brush. Okay, so what you want to choose is the moist light mix. Put it on 10, load 5, flow 11, and 10. And then you can mix those two together. And if you duplicate this layer, you can go to multiply, and it creates an even more like watercolory effect. And I also want to show you guys how to create watercolor paper while we're at. So create a new document. I'm just going to do 1000 by 1000. And I'm going to choose a different color, like an off-white right there. Okay. All right. And then I go to filter gallery. And you have this kind of like watercolor paper-ish. It's I'm using notebook paper. You can change the graininess. So in the relief here. And so that looks exactly like watercolor paper, and you can say okay. And if you wanted to make it more texture, you can duplicate the layer and press multiply and just bump down the fill a little bit and then merge visible. So now if you go back to your watercolor brush, create a new layer and select multiply, now it looks more watercolor-y-ish. Well, I hope you guys like this video. Thanks so much for watching. And if you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe. Thanks so much. Bye, guys.